The Graxian alliance had long feared the rise of new species beyond their borders. After centuries of peace, their empire had become complacent, believing that no civilization could challenge them. But when their scouts discovered the rapidly advancing human race in a distant star system, their fears erupted into action. The humans had begun to colonize planets beyond their own, and their warships were unlike anything the Graxians had seen. Their weapons were powerful, and they appeared fearless. The Graxian leaders decided to strike first, believing that if they waited, the humans would grow too strong to defeat. The Graxians were a race of highly intelligent, strategic thinkers, but they had never encountered a species like humanity. They watched from their warships as the humans prepared for battle. The Graxians expected fear. After all, who wouldn't tremble when facing the might of an empire that had conquered entire star systems? The humans, however, did not show fear. Instead, they seemed almost happy. Their soldiers grinned as they suited up, their faces gleaming with excitement. It was as though they were looking forward to the fight. As the first battle commenced, the Graxians unleashed their full arsenal, confident that they would overwhelm the humans in mere moments. But to their shock, the humans fought back with a ferocity they had never anticipated. Even when the Graxian weapons tore through their ships, human soldiers didn't hesitate. They charged forward, pushing their forces toward the enemy with relentless determination. The Graxian commanders were stunned. Human warships, though smaller and less advanced, fought like cornered animals, striking at the Graxian fleet with deadly precision. But what really unnerved the Graxians was not just the human skill in combat. It was the way they fought. Amidst the chaos of war, human soldiers smiled. Some grinned wildly as they fired their weapons. Others laughed as they maneuvered their ships. The more the Graxians tried to make sense of it, the less they understood. These humans, who had no real reason to fight, no centuries of tradition or training in warfare, were acting as if the battle was a game. They were enjoying it. In the midst of the battle, a Graxian scout ship, observing the conflict from a distance, transmitted a message to the Graxian flagship. The humans are smiling. Are they insane? Admiral Velix, a veteran of countless wars, sat in his command center staring at the data coming from the battlefield. He watched as human warships dodged incoming fire with ease, their pilots seeming to take joy in the chaos around them. "This cannot be," he muttered under his breath. "No species behaves this way." Despite their confusion, the Graxians pressed on. But the more they fought, the more they realized that these humans were not afraid. They didn't cower in fear of destruction or death. They didn't retreat when their ships were damaged. Instead, they repaired them quickly and dove back into battle. The Graxians had believed that fear was what drove soldiers to fight with strength. But here were these humans, fearless and laughing in the face of danger. To the Graxians, this was unnatural. Hours passed, and the battle raged on. The Graxian fleet was beginning to suffer heavy losses. Their ships, which had once been so formidable, were now on the defensive. Their advanced technology was no match for the humans' unpredictable strategies. With each passing minute, more Graxian vessels were destroyed, and the humans showed no sign of slowing down. In fact, they seemed to be getting stronger, more determined. It was as if the chaos of war only fueled their resolve. Meanwhile, aboard one of the captured human warships, Admiral Velix demanded answers. A human pilot, captured during a skirmish, was brought before him. The man was covered in cuts and bruises, his uniform torn, but he didn't seem afraid. He didn't even look worried. Instead, he wore a strange, calm smile, almost as if he had been enjoying the battle. "Why do you smile?" Velix demanded. "Why do you fight like this? Are you all mad?" The human pilot, Captain Rice, looked at Velix with an expression that combined amusement and pity. "We fight because we've always fought," Rice said quietly. "Humanity has faced wars, disasters, and challenges for centuries. We've survived them all. And we've learned something in the process. We don't fight out of fear. We fight out of courage. We smile because we know that no matter what happens, we will survive. We always do. Vilex listened carefully, struggling to understand. The idea that humans didn't fear death was almost alien to him. For the Graxians, fear was what made them cautious, what drove them to plan and strategize. But these humans, these warriors, had something different. They didn't retreat or hesitate. They charged forward, not because they were reckless, but because they knew that facing danger head-on was the only way to win. The more Reyes spoke, the more Vilex began to grasp the truth. The humans were not fighting because they wanted to conquer or destroy. They were fighting because it was in their nature. They were not like the Graxians, who had become complacent in their power. The humans were a young species, full of potential and energy, and they didn't fear the unknown. They thrived on it. As the battle came to a close, the Graxians found themselves retreating. Their fleet, once invincible, was now scattered and broken. The humans had not only fought with strength, they had fought with something far more powerful, unwavering resolve. The Graxians had underestimated them, assuming that fear would be the driving force behind the human response. But instead, it was the human spirit, their unshakable will to survive, that had turned the tide of the battle. When the smoke cleared and the humans stood victorious, the Graxians realized they had witnessed something extraordinary. They had thought that humanity was weak, that they could easily be defeated. But in reality, the humans were far stronger than they had ever imagined. It was not their technology or their weapons that had won the war. It was their unbreakable spirit. As the Graxian fleet limped away, Admiral Vilex could not shake the image of those smiling human soldiers. He had seen many battles in his lifetime, but never had he encountered a species like this. The humans had shown him one simple truth. No matter how powerful an enemy may seem, if you face them with courage and a smile, you can overcome anything. The battle between humanity and the Graxian alliance had raged for weeks, each side testing the other's limits. The Graxians, a race known for their advanced technology and superior strategic mind, were confident in their ability to crush any enemy. Their weapons were powerful, and their warships were built for speed and firepower. But humanity, with its unrelenting determination and unpredictability, was something the Graxians had never encountered before. They were small and outgunned, yet they fought like cornered animals, unwilling to give up. And what truly unnerved the Graxians wasn't just the humans' bravery, it was their smiles. The Graxians had observed the humans carefully from the beginning of the war. At first, they thought it was just a strange quirk, a sign of madness perhaps. But as the conflict progressed, it became clear that these smiles were something more. Human soldiers grinned even when their ships were damaged, even when they were under fire. Some of them laughed in the middle of intense combat. And the more the Graxians saw this, the more they began to fear it. The smiles terrified them. How could these creatures, who were facing almost certain defeat, still smile as if they were enjoying themselves? It was as though they were mocking death, daring it to come for them. Admiral Vilex of the Graxian fleet could not shake the image of those smiling human faces. Every time he looked at the battlefield, he saw the same thing. Human soldiers charging forward, grinning in the face of danger. The Graxians had been taught that fear was what motivated soldiers to fight hard, to push through the pain and the fear of death. But the humans, they didn't fear death. They welcomed it. It was as if they didn't even care whether they won or lost. They fought for the sheer joy of fighting, and that was something the Graxians couldn't understand. Vilex watched the most recent battle from his flagship, his brow furrowed in disbelief. The human ships had taken hit after hit, their hulls cracking, engines malfunctioning, and yet they continued to push forward. As one of the human warships veered dangerously close to the flagship, its captain grinned wildly, giving orders as if he were leading a charge into a parade, not a battle. The Graxians fired at it, but the ship dodged with an agility they hadn't thought possible, and when it returned fire, it hit a Graxian destroyer with perfect precision. The destroyer exploded in a burst of flame. The human captain's smile only widened. "What are they?" Velix muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. "They shouldn't be this strong. They should be trembling, begging for mercy, not smiling." The Graxian fleet had grown uneasy. It wasn't just the destruction of their ships that unnerved them. It was the feeling that something was deeply wrong about this war. Human warriors were not like any species they had encountered before. They didn't fight for glory or to conquer. They fought for survival, yes, but there was something else, something hidden behind those smiles. It was as if they were laughing at the very idea of fear. In a desperate move to understand, Velix ordered a special mission: capture a human soldier alive. If they could question one of them, they might learn what was driving them. Soon enough, the Graxians captured a wounded human pilot, unconscious and bleeding, and brought him aboard the flagship. When the human awoke, he found himself in a cold interrogation room, facing several Graxian officers. He was battered, bruised, and exhausted, but there was no sign of fear in his eyes. He barely seemed to notice the advanced technology surrounding him or the armed guards standing at attention. He simply looked around and smiled. "Why do you smile?" Velix demanded, his voice sharp. "Why do your people fight like this? You're outmatched, your ships are falling apart, and yet you continue to fight with no fear. What's the meaning of that smile?" The human, who had been identified as Captain Reyes, leaned back in his chair and chuckled softly. "It's simple, really," he said, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. "We smile because we've seen worse. We've been through wars, pandemics, famines, everything you can think of. And we survived. So now, when we're up against something new, something dangerous, we smile because we know one thing for sure: we'll survive this, too." Velix stared at him, trying to process the words. "You think you can survive against us?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Against the Graxian alliance?" Reyes smiled again, a little wider this time. "You think your weapons are the reason we're still here?" he said, shaking his head. "We don't fight because we think we'll win. We fight because we can't stop. We fight because it's in our blood. We fight because, as long as we're breathing, we refuse to give up. So yeah, we smile. Because, no matter what, we always come out the other side." The words hit Velix like a physical blow. He had assumed that victory was always about power, about overwhelming the enemy. But this human was telling him something else. It wasn't about firepower, strategy, or technology. It was about will. The human race had an ironclad determination that nothing seemed to break. And that was terrifying. The Graxians, for all their might, had never encountered an enemy like this. The interrogation continued, but Velix's mind was elsewhere, replaying the words of the human pilot over and over again. It wasn't just a smile. It was a declaration. A declaration that no matter the odds, no matter the pain or the suffering, humans would never stop fighting. The Graxians had thought their enemies would crumble under pressure, that fear would make them weak. But instead, they had found themselves up against an enemy that thrived on adversity. The next battle came quickly, and the Graxian fleet launched a full-scale assault. But the humans didn't retreat. They didn't hesitate. The smiles remained, even as the battle grew bloodier. For every ship the Graxians destroyed, 2 more human ships appeared, repaired and ready to fight. It was as if the more the Graxians attacked, the stronger the humans became. In the chaos, Velix found himself facing a new reality. The Graxian fleet had suffered heavy losses. What should have been a crushing victory had turned into a nightmare. The human warships, though outnumbered and outgunned, fought with a kind of ferocity that was impossible to predict. And all the while, those smiles persisted. By the time the battle ended, the Graxians had retreated, their fleet shattered. They had underestimated humanity, believing that their advanced technology and tactics would overwhelm the humans. But it wasn't their weapons that made the difference. It was the human spirit, something that could not be measured or calculated. The Graxians learned too late that a smile, when backed by determination, can be the most terrifying weapon of all. As the Graxian ships limped back to their homeworld, Admiral Velix couldn't help but think about what Captain Rice had said. We fight because we can't stop. In the end, that was humanity's greatest weapon. Their refusal to give up, their refusal to be broken. And that, above all else, was what terrified the Graxians the most. The Zolarian fleet hovered just outside Earth's atmosphere, their ships like dark giants against the backdrop of the planet. They had been observing humans for years, analyzing their behavior, technology, and society. The Zolarian Empire, known across the galaxy for its intellectual superiority, had decided to make first contact. However, what they found baffled them. The humans, despite being technologically inferior to the Zolarians, were unpredictable in ways no other species had been. Their minds, it seemed, were an enigma. Solarian scientists had studied human psychology from afar, but there was one thing they couldn't understand. Why did humans act the way they did? Why did they take risks, challenge authority, and even defy logic? In every species they had encountered, behavior could be explained through the science of the mind. But humans, their minds worked differently, defying every pattern the Zolarians had expected. It was this very mystery that intrigued them, yet at the same time, terrified them. The Zolarian Council decided to send an elite team to Earth, hoping to unlock the deepest secrets of the human mind. Among them was Kivra, the leading psychologist of the Zolarian Empire. She had studied countless species, yet she had never encountered one like humanity. Kivra's first encounter with the humans was unlike any she had experienced before. She had prepared herself for their primitive world, their simple ways, but she wasn't prepared for the overwhelming emotion that surrounded her. Humans, for all their technological shortcomings, were full of raw energy, a chaos that defied every theory of psychological order she had ever known. Her team arrived in a small town on Earth, carefully choosing a location that seemed to have no military significance, believing they could blend in and observe. But they quickly realized that humans were not so easily contained. Within hours, Kivra felt the atmosphere shift, as if the entire town was buzzing with thoughts and emotions, a cacophony she could not silence, no matter how much she tried. Humans, unlike any other species, seemed to carry an energy within them, an intensity that was far beyond the normal scope of logic. It was as if their minds were always at war with themselves, fighting to understand, to explore, to create, and to destroy. One evening, while observing a group of humans in a cafe, Kivra noticed something that made her freeze. A young man, sitting alone, was scribbling something on a napkin, his expression intense. His eyes flicked from side to side, his face a mixture of confusion and determination. Kivra felt a sudden pull to him, an urge to understand what was going on in his mind. She watched as his scribbles grew more frantic, more complex, until it was clear that his thoughts were racing out of control. Without thinking, Kivra stepped forward, her curiosity getting the better of her. She placed her hand on the table, leaning in to try to understand what was happening. The man looked up, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement, as if he had just discovered something dangerous within himself. You're not supposed to be here," he muttered, his voice low. "You can see it, can't you? You can see what's inside my head." Kivra was taken aback. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously, her voice gentle but filled with intrigue. The man stared at her, his eyes wide. "I can't control it. My thoughts, they're alive. They're fighting each other inside me. One moment, I feel like I understand everything. The next, I can't remember where I am or what I'm doing. It's like my mind is a battlefield." Kivra stepped back, her mind racing. What she was hearing defied all known principles of psychology. She had studied human minds from afar, but this was something different. The man's mind wasn't just struggling with confusion. It was fighting against itself, as if every thought had its own life, its own agenda. Are you Okay, Kivra asked, trying to understand. He shook his head, his eyes filling with a deep, quiet terror. You don't understand. I don't think anyone does. Sometimes it feels like I'm not even here. Like there's another version of me, a version that thinks differently, and he's constantly battling with a part of me that's trying to stay sane. Kivra's heart raced. What she was hearing was unlike anything she had encountered in any species. The human mind was chaotic, yes, but this was something more. It was as if the very structure of the human mind was a battlefield, a war that raged inside every person's head. Kivra left the cafe, her mind in a frenzy. She gathered her team and began to conduct a series of experiments on the humans they encountered. What she found was astounding. Every single human, without exception, had a similar experience, a constant inner conflict. It wasn't just one person who struggled with their thoughts. It was all of them. The thoughts didn't just fight for control. They seemed to take on personalities, emotions, and desires of their own, as if the mind itself was a chaotic landscape of competing forces. As she delved deeper, Kivra realized something even more unsettling. The humans weren't just aware of their inner conflicts. They thrived on them. In fact, it seemed as though the human mind was built for this constant struggle. The more intense the battle inside their heads, the more alive they felt. It was this very chaos that drove humans to create, to fight, to explore. Every decision, every action was influenced by the ongoing war inside their minds. Kivra began to fear the implications of her discoveries. The Zalarian Empire, with all its advanced technology and knowledge, had always relied on logic, order, and control. But humanity, they thrived in chaos. The more she understood their minds, the more she realized that no amount of technological superiority could ever control them. Humans weren't bound by the same rules. Their minds were unpredictable, capable of anything, because they didn't need order to survive. They didn't need structure to make sense of the world. Their strength lay in their ability to embrace the chaos, to thrive in it. The Zalarian team grew increasingly uneasy. What they had originally thought would be an easy study had turned into something far more dangerous. They had underestimated humanity. The more they learned, the more they realized that they couldn't just figure out the human mind. It was not something to be understood. It was something to be survived. One day, Kivra found herself questioning everything she knew. As she sat alone in her quarters, replaying the data and observations, something inside her shifted. The very thing she had been trying to control, the human mind's chaotic nature, was the very thing that made them powerful. And she knew then that the Zalarians would never control them. The humans were not like any other species. They had no need for order, no need for control. They only needed themselves, their inner chaos, and their ability to fight their own minds and still emerge victorious. The final realization struck Kivra with full force. The true power of the human mind wasn't in its ability to reason or plan. It was in its refusal to be controlled. And as she looked out at Earth from her ship, she couldn't help but feel a deep, overwhelming fear. Humanity was a force unlike any other, and the Zalarian Empire had made a grave mistake underestimating them. The war for the human mind had just begun, and Kivra knew she had witnessed something extraordinary. Humanity was not just surviving in chaos. They were mastering it. The war had been raging for years. The universe, once a peaceful expanse, had become a battleground. The humans, though still relatively new to space warfare, had proven to be a force no one could ignore. Their tactics were unpredictable, their resilience unmatched, and their will to survive seemed unbreakable. Yet, despite their best efforts, the odds were against them. The Vrexians, a powerful alien race known for their superior technology and strategic minds, had dominated the battlefield for most of the war. With their massive fleets and advanced weaponry, it seemed as though victory was a distant hope for humanity. But they didn't give up. They never gave up. It was during one of the darkest days of the war, when the Vrexian fleet had cornered Earth's remaining forces, that something extraordinary happened. Commander Eric Talon, a decorated officer with countless victories under his belt, stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, a battle-hardened warship that had seen more than its fair share of combat. His crew was exhausted, their morale low. They had lost so many battles, so many good men and women, and the enemy's relentless attacks seemed never-ending. But there was something different about the way the Phyrexians were attacking. It wasn't just brute force this time. It was methodical, calculated, almost as if they were waiting for something. Talon, ever the strategist, knew the Phyrexians didn't attack unless they were sure of victory. But the look in their eyes, that eerie confidence they carried, suggested that even they were starting to question their approach. There was a chink in their armor, and Talon could feel it. "We can't keep retreating like this," Lieutenant Rachel Quinn, his second-in-command, said, her voice filled with concern. She stood beside him, staring at the holo-display showing the incoming Phyrexian forces. The Phoenix was outnumbered, and the rest of their fleet was scattered, barely holding their own against the enemy. Talon looked out of the massive viewports of the bridge, watching the stars blink in the distance. The endless darkness of space seemed to stretch on forever. And yet he knew something had to change. They couldn't lose. Not like this. "I know, Rachel," Talon replied softly, his voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "But what can we do? We're too few, and they're too strong." Rachel looked at him, her eyes hard with determination. "We fight. That's what we do, Eric. We find a way to turn this around. We have to." Talon knew she was right. They couldn't just sit back and wait for the Phyrexians to crush them. They had to do something bold, something unexpected. And that's when the idea hit him. It wasn't about fighting the Phyrexians on their terms. It was about forcing them to fight on his terms. The Phyrexians had made one mistake. They thought they knew everything about human tactics. They thought they had studied every move, every battle plan, every strategy. But the one thing they didn't understand was the unpredictability of human nature. Humans didn't fight like anyone else. They fought with passion, with desperation, and sometimes with pure instinct. And Talon knew that if they were going to win, they had to tap into that unpredictability. He turned to Rachel, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. "It's time to turn the tide." "What are you thinking?" Rachel asked, her curiosity piqued. "We're going to hit them where it hurts," Talon said. "The Phyrexians may have better weapons, but they don't have the kind of unpredictability we do. We'll make them play by our rules. If we're going to survive this, we need to make them second-guess every move they make." The plan was simple, yet risky. Talon knew that if they were caught, it would mean certain death. But he also knew that if they didn't do something radical, they'd be wiped out, and humanity's last hope would be extinguished. As the Phyrexian ships moved closer, Talon ordered the Phoenix to take an unexpected route, one that would lead them into the heart of the enemy's formation. The Phyrexians were prepared for every possible strategy, except for this one. Instead of engaging in the expected battle, Talon instructed his crew to make evasive maneuvers, weaving through the enemy fleet, creating confusion, and disrupting their communications. As the Phoenix darted in and out of the Phyrexian ships, Talon could see the confusion spread across their ranks. The Phyrexian commanders were struggling to keep up with the human ships' erratic movements. They were trying to predict the next move, but the humans were impossible to predict. "I've never seen them so disoriented," Rachel said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "They thought we'd fight the way they expected us to," Talon replied, a smile tugging at his lips. "But they forgot one thing. We're human. We don't follow rules. We make our own." The tide had begun to turn. The Phyrexians, once so sure of their victory, were now on the back foot. They couldn't track the Phoenix, and their fleet was falling apart. One by one, their ships began to break formation, their lines of communication disrupted, their attacks becoming erratic. Talon's gamble was working. But just as hope began to rise, the Phyrexians adapted. They started to focus on the Phoenix more intently, firing on all fronts in an attempt to trap it. The enemy's superior weapons began to land hits on the Phoenix, causing severe damage to its hull. Sparks flew across the bridge, and alarms blared, signaling that the ship's shields were failing. "We can't take much more of this," Rachel shouted over the noise, her voice filled with urgency. Talon gritted his teeth. They were close, so close. "Hold on," he commanded. "We need just one more push." With the Phyrexians closing in, Talon made a split-second decision. He ordered the Phoenix to go straight into the heart of the enemy formation, heading directly for their flagship. It was a dangerous move. Too dangerous. If they missed their target by even the smallest margin, they would be destroyed. But Talon trusted his crew, and he trusted his instincts. "Brace for impact," Talon shouted. The Phoenix shot forward, slamming through enemy fire, dodging and weaving in a desperate attempt to reach the flagship. As they neared their target, Talon's heart pounded in his chest. They were almost there. Then, with a mighty explosion, the Phoenix launched a barrage of missiles directly into the Phyrexian flagship, causing a massive chain reaction that obliterated the enemy vessel. The Phyrexian fleet, leaderless and in chaos, began to retreat, leaving behind a stunned human fleet that had just pulled off the impossible. "We did it," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with awe. Talon stood silently, watching the remains of the Phyrexian fleet scatter. They had done it. Against all odds, they had turned the tide of the war. It wasn't just a victory, it was a declaration. Humanity had shown the universe that it wasn't to be underestimated. But Talon knew that this was only the beginning. The battle for survival would continue, but for the first time in years, the humans had the upper hand. And as the Phoenix sailed into the stars, Talon couldn't help but feel that the universe had just learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate humanity. The war had been dragging on for years, and humanity was losing hope. The Phyrexians, a race known for their advanced technology and military superiority, had slowly but surely pushed human forces back to the brink of extinction. Their ships, massive and intimidating, filled the sky, and their weapons destroyed entire cities in mere seconds. Earth had been fighting for its survival, but as the days passed, it seemed like there was no end in sight. Commander Jason Holt, a man who had seen more than his fair share of battles, stood on the bridge of the Aegis, humanity's last remaining warship. His face was hard, etched with years of stress and endless hours spent strategizing, trying to outwit the Phyrexian forces. The rest of the fleet had been wiped out, and it was now down to him and his crew. They had the will to fight, but the question remained, could they actually win? The Phyrexians had arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system just days before. Their fleet was overwhelming, and there seemed to be no way for the humans to survive. But there was something strange in the air that day. Commander Holt stood, staring out at the distant stars, as the ship hummed beneath his feet. The quiet before the storm felt almost unbearable. "What's the status, Lieutenant?" Holt asked, breaking the silence. He turned to Lieutenant Rachel Lawson, his second in command, who was busy analyzing the incoming Phyrexian ships on the holomap. "They're closing in," Rachel replied, her voice tense but calm. "They'll be in range within the hour. At this point, we have no choice but to fight." Holt nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. He had studied every possible strategy, every potential way to turn the tide of the war. But nothing seemed to work. The Phyrexians were too powerful. They had anticipated every move, every tactic. But then, as Holt turned back to the window, something unexpected happened. The Aegis jolted as a massive explosion rocked the ship. The impact threw everyone off balance, and alarms blared throughout the ship. The lights flickered, and the crew scrambled to their stations. "Damage report," Holt barked, regaining his composure. "Shields are down to 30%, sir," Rachel shouted, frantically typing on her console. "We've lost one of our engines. We're going to have to fight on one engine." Holt's face hardened. The odds had just worsened. If they didn't act quickly, they'd be sitting ducks. He turned toward Rachel, and then to his crew. Prepare for battle. We're not going down without a fight. The Vrexians continued their advance, their ships steadily moving closer, their massive weapons primed and ready. Holt's thoughts raced as he considered their options. They could try to escape, but that was unlikely. If they fled, they would be hunted down. Their only chance was to stand and fight. But just as Holt began to give orders, a strange, almost eerie calm seemed to fill the bridge. There was something about the way the Vrexians were acting. Too quiet, too methodical. It was as if they were waiting for something. That's when Holt saw it. At the edge of the Vrexian fleet, in the center of the formation, a single ship broke away. It moved slowly toward the Aegis, and for a moment, Holt couldn't understand why. The ship was smaller, seemingly insignificant compared to the massive warships surrounding it. It was almost as if the Vrexians were sending a message. Holt's instincts told him that something was about to change. "Lieutenant, can you identify that ship?" Holt asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Rachel's fingers flew over the controls. "It's not showing up on any of our scans, sir. It's like it's cloaked. But the power signature is faint. And wait, hold on. It's a human ship." A wave of disbelief hit Holt. A human ship? But how? Just as he spoke, a voice came over the ship's communication system. It was clear, strong, and calm, and it cut through the tension on the bridge like a knife. "This is Captain Sarah Walker of the Liberty," the voice said. "We've come to help." Holt's heart skipped a beat. Sarah Walker was one of the finest commanders the human race had ever produced, and she had been missing in action for years. No one had heard from her or her ship since the early days of the war. And now, here she was, seemingly out of nowhere. "How did you survive?" Holt asked, his voice a mix of relief and confusion. "We've been out of the fight for a while," Sarah replied. "We've been gathering allies, building up a fleet of our own, and waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, it seems, that moment has arrived." Holt could hardly believe his ears. The Liberty had been lost, and yet here it was, flying straight into the heart of the Vrexian fleet. The ship's unexpected return was more than just a miracle. It was a sign of hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness of war. As the Liberty joined the battle, the Vrexians hesitated. For the first time, they didn't know what to do. They had expected humanity to crumble, to fall in line under their overwhelming power. But this was different. The unexpected arrival of the Liberty was like a spark in a powder keg. Suddenly, humanity wasn't alone. They had a chance. Holt watched as the Liberty fired its weapons, cutting through the Vrexian ships with precision. The Aegis joined the fray, and the tide of the battle began to shift. The Vrexians, disoriented and surprised, couldn't keep up with the sudden onslaught. But just as the battle seemed to turn in their favor, something strange happened. Holt noticed that as Sarah's ship continued to fight, she wasn't just leading with her weapons. She was doing something else, something that didn't make sense. She was smiling. It was a small, almost imperceptible expression. But to Holt, it was a symbol of something more. The smile wasn't one of victory, nor was it one of defiance. It was a smile of sheer determination, a message to everyone watching that humanity was not finished. It was as if Sarah knew that no matter how dark things got, they would never give up. That smile, that simple gesture, sparked something in every person watching. It reminded them that they were human, that they had the strength to stand tall, to push back against impossible odds. The Vrexians faltered. They had underestimated humanity, believing that they would fall in line, that they would be crushed without question. But Sarah's smile had shattered that belief, and in that moment, the Vrexians realized that they had made a grave mistake. Humanity was not a force to be controlled. They were a force to be reckoned with. The battle raged on, but the outcome was no longer in question. The Vrexians, once confident in their victory, now found themselves on the retreat. The Liberty and the Aegis fought side by side, pushing the Vrexian fleet back. And as the Vrexian ships scattered, Holt couldn't help but look at Sarah's smile one last time. It had changed everything. It had given them the hope, the courage, and the strength to turn the tide of the war. And it had all started with a smile.